Oakwood was a peaceful small town surrounded by dense woods and steep hills, tucked away from the world's busy roads. People in Oakwood lived quiet lives, their days filled with routine, their nights marked by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves. But Oakwood harbored a dark secret, a secret whispered about in the shadows, a tale passed down through generations but never openly spoken of. It was the tale of the haunted bus. It started as a rumor, just something to scare children during the long, cold nights of fall. But for some, it was more than just a tale. It was real. It was a haunting presence that seemed to defy logic, time, and reason. No one who had seen it, let alone boarded it, had ever returned the same. Some didn't return at all. And for those who dared to challenge the legend, the price was steep. The bus wasn't just any abandoned relic, it was a vessel of torment, a place where the souls of the lost were forever trapped, never able to find peace. The bus traveled the roads of Oakwood only in the dead of night, its red lights illuminating the misty roads and casting a blood-red glow upon the silent woods. Daniel had always been the curious type. He didn't believe in the supernatural or the old ghost stories that the older townsfolk would tell around the fire on chilly evenings. The tales of the haunted bus were no different. He laughed them off, just like everyone else in town. But when Daniel and his friends Kyle, Jake, and Rachel found themselves at the local diner one evening, they overheard a conversation that would change everything. "Did you hear about the bus?" An elderly man sitting at the counter whispered to his companion. "It's been spotted again." The mention of the bus caught Daniel's attention. He turned to his friends with a smirk. "It's just another one of those spooky tales they tell to get attention." But Rachel, always more curious than cautious, leaned forward. "Wait, they've seen it? Where?" The elderly man, ignoring Daniel's dismissive tone, continued. "It was near the old bus depot on the edge of town. I've heard it's been coming back every night, always at midnight." Kyle shook his head, trying to maintain the bravado they all shared. "That's just some old legend. No way is there a ghost bus." But Daniel, though skeptical, felt a strange pull in his gut. He couldn't resist the idea of proving the story wrong. "Let's check it out tonight," he said, his voice a mix of challenge and curiosity. His friends stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to say. Finally, Jake spoke. "If you want to go see a ghost bus, be my guest, but I'm not following you." Rachel, ever the thrill seeker, smiled. "I'll go. This is either going to be a great story to tell or we'll get the fright of our lives." That night, at exactly midnight, Daniel, Rachel, and Jake drove out to the old bus depot. The air was thick with fog, and the trees surrounding the road seemed to whisper in the wind. The bus depot itself was a dilapidated, rusting shell of what once was, a relic of a bygone era. The old bus sat in the distance, its once white exterior now covered in grime and rust. The windows were dark and an eerie stillness hung in the air. As they got closer, they could see it, the faint red glow coming from the windows. Rachel laughed nervously, trying to mask the growing fear. "Okay, that's creepy," she muttered. "It's just the moonlight reflecting off the glass, right?" Daniel wasn't so sure. The air was still, too still, and the bus seemed to be waiting. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something was wrong. Before they could react, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Turning quickly, they saw a figure, tall, wearing a long overcoat, and with eyes that gleamed a bright, unnatural red. The figure didn't speak. He just stood there, staring. "You shouldn't be here," the man's voice was cold and low. "Turn around and leave, now." Rachel froze, but Daniel, in his typical defiant manner, stepped forward. "What do you mean? This is just an old bus. There's nothing to be afraid of." The man's eyes seemed to burn into his soul. "You don't understand. The souls of the lost ride that bus. They can never leave. And neither will you if you board it." Daniel's heart began to race. Something inside him told him that this man was not just some old hermit. There was something unnatural about him, something terrifying. but his pride mixed with fear made him challenge the warning. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. The man took a step closer, his red eyes now glowing even brighter, sending a chill down Daniel's spine. "I am what happens to those who get too close to the bus. Don't make the same mistake. Leave before it's too late." But it was already too late. Rachel, terrified but too curious to back down, had already stepped toward the bus. "I'm going to see what's inside." Daniel tried to stop her, but the figure turned and began walking away, his voice echoing in the night. "You'll regret it." The moment Rachel stepped onto the bus, the world seemed to freeze. The doors creaked shut behind them, and the eerie red lights flickered on, casting an otherworldly glow throughout the interior. Inside, the bus was empty, except for the strange feeling that something was watching them. The seats were old and tattered, the fabric worn and faded. Daniel could feel the hairs on his arms stand on end as he slowly walked through the aisle, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. Suddenly, the engine of the bus roared to life, shaking the entire vehicle. The bus jerked forward, its headlights cutting through the fog. Rachel screamed, "What's happening? This isn't real. This can't be real." The sound of the bus's engine was deafening. It echoed in their minds, and as Daniel turned to look at the others, he saw it. Through the front window, a figure was standing just outside the bus, a tall man with glowing red eyes. It was the same man they had seen earlier, the one who had warned them. But now, he was no longer human. His skin was cracked and decayed, his features contorted in agony. Daniel couldn't move. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The bus was moving faster now, tearing down the road, but it wasn't going anywhere, just circling back in an endless loop. The air inside the bus grew cold, and Daniel could see his breath fogging up. "This isn't real," he muttered, trying to convince himself. But deep down, he knew it was. The spirits of the lost passengers, those who had perished in the accident all those years ago, were aboard. Their hollow, empty eyes stared at them from the seats. Rachel grabbed Daniel's arm, her voice trembling. "We need to get off, now!" But it was too late. The doors wouldn't open. The bus was no longer in Oakwood. It was somewhere else, somewhere between worlds. And that's when Daniel saw it. Outside the window, the dark, shadowy figure of the driver appeared, his face now twisted into a grotesque mask of pain. His eyes were burning with red-hot fury. "Get out now!" the driver screamed, but his voice was distant and warped, as though it was coming from a far-off place. The bus continued its journey through the dark, desolate roads, never stopping, never slowing. Daniel could feel the pull of the spirits around him. The passengers were no longer human. Their faces were ghastly masks of sorrow, their bodies twisted by the horrors they had endured. They stared at Daniel with eyes that had long since lost their humanity. One of the passengers, the figure of a woman, reached out a skeletal hand, her fingers brushing Daniel's arm. "We can never leave," she whispered. "Neither will you." Daniel wanted to scream, to break free, but the terror in his chest was too much. He was trapped. The bus kept moving through an endless tunnel of darkness where time seemed irrelevant. The night never ended. There was no dawn, no morning light to signal escape. Only the cold, suffocating atmosphere and the screams of the damned. As Daniel looked around, his thoughts turned to the old man who had warned them. Had he been telling the truth? Was the bus truly cursed? And if it was, how could they ever get off? Suddenly, Daniel remembered the old talisman the priest had given him. He dug through his pockets, feeling the cool metal between his fingers. It was the only thing that could free them. With shaking hands, Daniel held it up to the bus's interior, chanting the words the priest had told him. The bus began to shudder, the red lights flickering. The spirits screamed, their tortured faces twisting in agony. The driver's face contorted in fury, his red eyes glowing brighter. But Daniel didn't stop. He continued chanting, pushing the talisman forward. The air grew thick with power, and the bus seemed to convulse, its body shaking as though it were coming apart. With one final shout, the bus lurched to a halt. The red lights flickered out, and for the first time, the air inside the bus became still. The spirits were gone, their wails fading into silence. The bus was empty. Daniel opened his eyes, finding himself standing alone on a deserted road. The bus had vanished, its torment gone, and the world seemed to return to normal. Oakwood returned to its peaceful state, the dark legend of the haunted bus fading into the past. But Daniel knew better. He knew that terror would never truly end. As he lay in bed that night, the faint sound of a bus horn echoed in the distance. He sat up, heart racing. The bus was out there, somewhere, waiting. And as long as Oakwood existed, it would never truly go away. If I were you, Daniel thought, I'd stay far away from that bus. Because once it finds you, there's no going back.